Great. Good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on compassionate leadership hosted by the Center for Gender Equity at University of Global Health Equity. It's great to see such a diverse group of participants, as you can see from the slide. My name is Tsion Yohannes, and I'm the chair for the Center for Gender Equity at UGHE. And here at the center, we are very happy to see this much diversity in our group of mentors and mentees. And we really look forward to interesting conversations and your active engagement on this webinar and even beyond this. On the next slide. Today's session is an introductory webinar on compassionate leadership. And as I said earlier, we hope you find this topic interesting. And I will give a brief introduction about the agenda next. So today, we want to start off this session on compassionate leadership with an opening remark from our Vice Chancellor, Professor Agnes Binagwaho, followed by an introduction of mentors and mentees by Leila Dusabe. After the introductions are done, our speaker, April Budd, will do a presentation on cultivating compassionate leadership for about half an hour. And after the presentation, participants would get a chance to pose their questions to the speaker and hopefully to get to know each other even better. And let me give some housekeeping rules for your consideration. While we are not speaking, let's all keep our videos on, but our audios off. And if you have any questions during the presentations, feel free to drop those in the Q&A box here. And I hope you'll find this very engaging and we'll keep the conversations going on. So maybe if we can have the slides up. Before we do the sessions, maybe let me introduce our speakers. Our speaker, April Budd, is a program management advisor who has engaged in various endeavors in the healthcare delivery, education, global health, and consulting arenas in the US and Rwanda over the past 19 years. April has a master's degree in health services administration from University of Michigan and completed her fellowship at Jefferson Health in Philadelphia. She began her career in global health as a health management and leadership mentor for the Rwandan Ministry of Health, and later taught in the master's degree programs at University of Rwanda and University of Global Health Equity. April's current work is with Global Public Health Organization and expands upon her executive education and coaching work to design creative learning opportunities in the virtual environment. April sees building community as core to her personal and professional missions. Thank you so much for being here with us today, April. It's a great pleasure to have you. And here with us, we also have Professor Agnes Binagwaho, who is the Vice Chancellor of the University of Global Health Equity in Rwanda. She'll give her opening remarks. Professor Agnes previously worked as the Executive Secretary of Rwanda's National AIDS Control Commission, as Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Health, and as the Minister of Health in Rwanda. She serves as a senior advisor to the Director General of the WHO, is a senior lecturer at Harvard Medical School and adjunct clinical professor at Dartmouth. She is a member of the US National Academy of Medicine and a fellow of the African Academy of Sciences. She was named among the 100 most influential African women for 2020 and recently won the UNESCO L'Oreal International Prize for Women in Sciences, among other recognitions. I would now like to invite Professor Agnes to give us the opening remarks.
Good afternoon, everybody. Dear mentors and mentee for cohort 1 and 2 of the mentorship program, dear Tsion and team, faculty members of UGHE, I am very pleased to warmly welcome everyone for this webinar organized for the cohort 1 and 2 of the UGHE Mentorship Program. The mentorship program is very important for UGHE to support and help the next generation of global health scientists at the time of major changes in health sector and health science education and research. Thank you, Tsion, and your team for successfully organizing this global mentorship program. The UGHE Mentorship Program is an innovative one that was launched at the request of young African scientists and implemented by the Center for Gender Equity as one of the actionable items from the Great Global Health Conference, Women Leaders in Global Health, that UGHE held in 2019. The young female scientists asked us to create and maintain networks between early career professionals and health professional experts in Africa and beyond who have achieved successful professional lives. So here we are with the new second cohort of mentees and great mentees from the first cohort, great mentors also, who are thought leaders, innovators, fantastic coaches, and change makers to mentor you all and help flourish your huge potential. These mentors will identify how to improve your work, find your great potential, and will make you believe in your own ability to grow, learn, and develop, and ensure you will get results. This mentorship program focuses on young African women because it is more difficult for young women to progress in this field that is seriously gender imbalanced. The mentorship also aims to equip all participants, male or female, with knowledge on how to lead their global health activities with attention to social justice and gender equity, and to help you improve your professional and family life. Mentors will give you formal guidance on how to be lifelong learners and grow continuously your skills, and how to navigate and embark in new roles, etc. This program is funded by elevating both mentors and mentees' leadership, as they are cross-cutting and necessary skills in any role, with the goal for the mentees to give back one day and become mentors themselves. To allow for mentees to grow in such leaders, the mentor's role will provide support either in a formal or informal ways and help to teach how to create appropriate networks. The role of mentees is to take ownership of the relationship and provide the direction in which they wish to see the mentorship go and grow, and be specific with the type of support they need. Both mentees and mentors need to be transparent and honest in their communications and expectations. To facilitate this, the University of Global Health Equity's Center of Gender Equity will host several webinars, and the past webinars are accessible to all. You can ask Tsion and her team. They will tell you how to access them. Today's webinar focuses on compassionate leadership. It is timely because COVID-19 has demonstrated that to deal with the pandemic's effects, such as spiking mental health crisis and inequities, we need collaborative, innovative, and empathic approaches to close loops in communication among health professionals and their patients, among community members, and in families. I thank everybody for joining the UGHE team, and I hope all mentees and mentors will enjoy and learn from this engagement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Agnes, for these important points about mentorship and what it means for us at UGHE as well. Professor Agnes has another urgent meeting and would leave us now, but I'd like to thank her for making time for this event. And let me add a bit about our program. So when the Center for Gender Equity took the first cohort, we had 25 mentors and mentees last year. And this came from 25 countries with the majority female status, 64% of all the mentees and mentors were females in last year's cohort. And for that group, we prepared for 3 webinars. So the first one was on effective mentorship. The second one was on developing of learning objectives. And the third was on leadership in a mentoring program. But this time around, we are starting with the topic of compassionate leadership, which is an important issue to discuss in times like this when we have to rely on online communications and have to deal with different challenges. And right now in this second cohort, we have 30 mentors and 30 mentees. And again, we have 21 countries represented in this group. The majority are from Africa, 71% of the participants are from Africa, and the rest from Asia, North America, and the Caribbean. And again, in this group, we have the majority female, so 67% of the mentees and 60% of the mentors are females, and they work in different roles in the global health field. So you can imagine our excitement in having such a diverse group. And now I would like to call April Budd to take us through the session and provide us with some insights about compassionate leadership, and then we can dive into a discussion following her presentation. Welcome to the podium, April.
Thank you, Tsion, and thank you all for your introductions. It was wonderful to see your faces, and I welcome you, if you like, to stay on camera. It's nice to have some feedback and helps with connection. So anyone who would like to be on camera, I welcome that. Good afternoon and good evening, and also good morning. I think someone said they were in the US, so anyone who's in my time zone. I am calling in to join you all from New York. And here we're kind of progressing into what we have our fall season. And so a transition of seasons, which is always a nice time for reflection. So that's what's happening with me right now. And it's beautiful to be connected with people all around the world as we experience our different environments that we're in. I do want to give a thank you to Tsion and Deborah for this invitation and for the foresight to know how important this topic is and how progressive this topic is. It's important to our development as leaders of this generation and the next, and it's the direction that we're going in. I was listening to a podcast about compassionate listening, and there are 2 people who are based here in the States, and they started a center, and they said we're probably about at 1% penetration, meaning like 1% of people are actually doing compassionate leadership. So this is something that's really new. And so having this as the topic today is progressive and will really set this group apart as the leaders of this in the next generation. So I'm glad to be a part of it and glad to be welcomed into this community. So on the next slide, I would like to get to know a bit about everyone who is in the room. And we're going to do this through a poll. So again, we are in the virtual environment, so this will not be perfect. I ask that you all experiment with me as we take a poll to know more about your experience with mentoring. So in a second, I will launch the poll, and you're going to answer the question, what's your experience with mentoring? So for some of you, it may be your first time. You might currently be in a mentoring relationship and it's going well. Someone else might be in a mentoring relationship and you're like, we don't know what we're doing. Or you may have cultivated more than one mentoring relationship. So this gives us a chance to see our collective experience. So I'm going to launch the poll now and give you a few seconds to select your option. Can you all see the getting to know you poll in front of you? You can give me a thumbs up or a head nod if you're on camera. Not yet. Okay, give me a second. Okay, can you see the poll in front of you now? I see a head nod. Thank you. So please go ahead and make your selections, and we'll give some time to get the majority of responses in. Okay, good. We're seeing some of you, it's your first time. Congratulations. Okay, about 70% of you have put in your responses. I'll wait a few more seconds to allow others the time before I show you the results. And just so you all know, I'm very comfortable with pause. So I may pause and it's okay for us to sit in those pauses together. Okay. Excellent. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll now and then share the results with you. Can you see the results? So 39% of you, it is your first time. So congratulations, you're embarking on this journey. I think that this program, from everything I've learned about it, is a beautiful space to be in for your first time on a mentoring journey, because I can already see how intentional the Center for Gender Equity is being about developing these relationships. And then it looks like about a little over 25% of you, or let's see, about 22%, you're in a relationship, it's going well. 35% you've cultivated. So we would say, 57% of you have experience with mentorships that are going well. And then only 4% are saying we don't know what we're doing. So that's good, but for the 4%, don't feel alone. It's very normal. I think with any process, any relationship or activity that is a journey, you'll spend years sometimes feeling like you don't know what you're doing. And a large part of that is normal and can be expected. And I believe that just being in it is a part of your growth, being in it and being present. So you can go to the next slide. Presence is really important, because that is growth. Even when we don't feel like we know what we're doing, by being present and showing up, that is a part of our growth as well. And so I commend all of you for being here today. You're showing up, being a part of this program, being in this community, being in the Zoom webinar today. And in front of you is a quote that says, "Courage starts with showing up and letting ourselves be seen." So that's going to be, core throughout my speech today, because I think that this mentoring relationship is a process of showing yourself to someone and allowing yourself to be seen. And it's a reciprocal relationship between mentor and mentee. To go back to Dr. Agnes's words about the leadership of both roles will be developed through this process. And so we'll talk about that together in our discussion today. So thank you for participating in that poll with me. And in the next slide, I want to transition just to talk about what compassionate leadership is. And I put up a few bullets. There are many definitions. If you go online, you see different definitions. And I pulled out some things from one site that talks about what compassionate leadership is from different perspectives. And so it is cultivating this culture of safety, belonging, and connection. And you'll be practicing that through your mentoring relationships and hopefully bringing that into the work that you do outside of these relationships. Compassionate leadership also displays kind-hearted concern for the full range of human experiences. So we are not just our work selves, we are our family selves, we are our hobby selves. We have many different aspects, and in those different parts of our lives, we experience various emotions. We experience joy, we experience suffering. And so compassionate leadership actually says, I'm concerned about all the different selves that are you, that compose your whole self. And I'm concerned about that within the work environment. And I know that that's important to you performing well, being productive, and contributing to the organization. Compassionate leadership recognizes the strength and courage required to act as needed. So when we talk about being present and showing up, that there's strength and courage in that every day, especially during times like now, when there's this collective suffering that we're experiencing with COVID-19 having an impact on all of our lives around the globe. There's a lot of uncertainty. And so as a compassionate leader, I can recognize that the people I work with are displaying a great deal of strength and courage to act as needed in the workplace. And I can do that through having a concern, knowing that they have this full range of experiences that are happening. And then also compassionate leadership is based on an innate instinct. You know, I believe that compassion is in us all and that we're born with it. So it is innate to us. However, we can develop it and cultivate it through practice. And so while it's innate, it doesn't mean that it is the first option that we choose, because we've been taught other ways of being, we've been conditioned in other ways. And so practice allows us to feel comfortable bringing compassion into our leadership work and into our daily lives in various ways. So leaders are everywhere. I don't believe in the idea that certain people can only be leaders or that leaders are born. Each of us, we lead in our own unique ways. And I know you all know that because you're displaying that. And we all have opportunities to lead. And so I hope to, in the discussion later, talk about some of those ways that we all lead that may not be identified as leadership, but that we're showing that, and we know that that is what leadership looks like every day with all of us. Thank you. Next slide. I'm going to talk about 2 tools for compassionate leadership. There are many, but I chose to talk about 2 so that we can have some depth and spend some time in discussion later. And the 2 tools that I'm talking about today will be mindfulness and compassionate listening. Next slide. So for mindfulness, so many of you may already have a mindfulness practice. If you have a mindfulness practice, you know what that means and you have a practice, but you can just raise your hand and I'll scroll through the participants to see who has it. Okay, I see Autumn raised her hand. And so often we have our mindfulness practice, but for some reason we think we have to kind of shut it off when we walk through our office door, virtual setting, when we click, the join button for the Zoom meeting. So for compassionate leadership, it's taking the mindfulness practice that many of you are saying you have already and merging that into your work. And so mindfulness practices in front of you, walking. So if you do go into the office, mindfully walking to the office or mindfully walking from one meeting to the next, if it's just down the hallway, being aware of the steps that you're taking as you're going. Often our brain will already be thinking about the next meeting, or we'll be worrying about what we said in the last meeting. And so mindfully walking is just really paying attention to each step you take. Mindful breathing, taking the time to pause and breathe between meetings, taking the time to pause before answering a question. Often we feel pressure to respond right away. Pause and breathing, it really does help calm the mind and helps us check in with how we're showing up and how we respond. Mindfully eating. Later, I'll talk about some ways to, if we have time, I'll talk about some ways to connect in the virtual setting. And one of those is eating together. And so, mindfully eating alone, I might really focus on chewing each bite and tasting the food. But when you're together, it might just be describing what's on your plate to your partner in this relationship and talking about that and being aware of what you're taking in. Listening in the virtual setting, mindful listening could be listening to the background. I was on a call, a prep call for this with Deborah and Tsion, and I heard the birds in the background. I miss Rwandan birds a lot. Some people don't even notice it, but that's kind of being mindful, is listening to what's in the background and accepting that and embracing that into your space. And then single tasking. In a world that promoted multitasking, I think we're slowly recognizing that we can do more than one thing at once, but we probably don't do either of those things very well. And so taking the time for the things that are important to do one task at a time, closing all other windows, clearing our desk, turning off our phones, silencing notifications. So mindfulness allows us to be in a space that is calm, that then allows us to practice compassion in our leadership. So it's a core tool to compassionate leadership. The next tool that I'll talk about is compassionate listening. And I have a video so that you can hear from the source. The picture you see here is of Thich Nhat Hanh, and he's going to, in his words, tell us what compassionate listening is. So let's play that video now.
You refer to, I can't remember which book, but you talk about deep listening also.
Deep listening is the kind of listening that can help relieve the suffering of the other person. We can call it compassionate listening. You listen with only one purpose: help him or her to empty his heart. And if you remember that you are helping him or her to suffer less, and then even if he say things full of wrong perceptions, full of bitterness, you are still capable to continue to listen with compassion, because you know that listening like that with compassion, you give him or her a chance to suffer less. If you want to help him or her to correct his perception, and then you wait for another time, but for this, the time being, you just listen with compassion and help him or her to suffer less. And 1 hour like that can bring transformation and healing.
So I love this idea of deep listening, because oftentimes when someone comes to you and they want to really vent, they want to purge whatever is going on inside them, people start talking and giving advice. So if you allow the person just to let whatever those feelings are to come out, and then at another time come back to them with your advice or your comments, you would experience a deeper healing. That's what you're saying.
Yes, the fear, the anger, and the despair is born on the ground of wrong perception. And we have wrong perceptions concerning ourselves and the other person. And that is the foundation for conflict and war and violence.
You've said that the only way we can begin to end war is due to communication between people.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And we should be able to say like this: dear friends, dear people, I know that you suffer a lot. I have not understood enough of your difficulties and suffering. It's not our intention to make you suffer more. It is the opposite. So please tell us about your suffering, your difficulties. I'm eager to learn, to understand. You have to start like that, loving speech. And if we are honest, if we are true, they will open their heart and tell us. And then we practice compassionate, deep listening. And during the process of deep listening, we can learn so much about our own perception and their perceptions. Mm-hmm. And that is the best way, the only way to remove terrorism.
Terrorism, or even difficulties between yourself and
yes.
family members or friends.
Yes.
And the principle is the same no matter the conflict.
Yes.
Terrorists, anti-terrorists,
yes.
father and son,
right.
Yourself and your boss,
right.
Yourself and your children, your best friend.
Yes.
Thank you. I thought it was important to bring this tool today. You know, as I was preparing, I thought about a few years ago at this university at UGHE, I designed a class on listening, and it was for one of the executive education programs. And at that time, I designed that class. It hadn't been taught before, and possibly it's been replicated since, but I designed it because I recognized that there was this deficit in listening skills in our management and leadership practices. And I knew the power of enhancing our listening skills to be more effective leaders. And so that course was around active listening. This takes it a step further with compassionate listening. And I was inspired to talk about that as we think about how do we actually become compassionate leaders. It starts with listening. And as Thich Nhat Hanh said to us, you know, there's a lot of transformation that can take place through compassionate listening. It's transformative and really shaping how we work together on a daily basis and from a global perspective. You know, he was speaking globally about like world peace, really, right? And then at the end, Oprah talked about how it's even applicable in your family relationships. So just how we work together in every aspect of our lives, it's transformative in that way, and how we understand each other as humans. So again, having empathy, how we really heal together during this time of collective suffering. I talked about earlier, you know, we're in COVID, Dr. Agnes talked about in her intro as well. That has opened us up to just new ways of being and a necessary focus on healing together. And then outside of COVID, there's always pressures, right? There's ongoing pressures of how do I balance all the different parts of me? And so compassionate listening can be transformative in all these different ways. And so I thought it was really important to discuss it today. And I look forward to hearing feedback from you during the discussion around how you have used compassionate listening, maybe without naming it that way, or how you think you can use it and what relationships it may help you with. I was even challenged preparing this around some compassionate listening in my own personal life. So it was nice to have that reminder for me. So next, on the next slide, I'd like to talk about, you know, we have compassionate leadership and how compassionate listening can help us get there. How do you apply compassionate leadership into your mentoring experience? So there's this idea of compassionate mentorship. And once you engage in compassionate mentorship, it really does enhance a lot of different aspects. And so I highlighted a few on the slide. Vulnerability is one core one. So enhancing your vulnerability, it allows you to form stronger connection. So it will be the two of you, mentor and mentee. You'll be in a room, likely virtual, just like this. Being vulnerable together will enhance that connection. And having empathy will allow you to build trust so that you can get closer to vulnerability. Being transparent helps you to collaborate. If I'm asking my mentor for advice, I have a lunch meeting with my mentor this weekend, and being transparent about where I am, the successes I've had, the struggles I'm having, both personally and professionally, actually helps me collaborate with my mentor in a way that they can give advice that is applicable. And then receiving compassionate mentorship and being a part of a compassionate mentoring relationship, even as a mentor, it enhances your confidence to bring your whole self. So by practicing in this relationship, you bring your whole self into this relationship, you're more comfortable bringing your whole self into your work environment, into your family environment, with partners, external partners, regulators. And so this is a ground for cultivating compassionate leadership, this relationship that you'll have together. Next slide. I'm going to give an example. Can I see how much time I have? I do have an example. So how much time do I have left?
10 minutes, but we can push it a little.
Okay, I appreciate that. I just want to make sure. So I'm giving an example from my own life. This is when I was much younger. I had a situation where, and this is during my master's program. So in my master's program, I went to a school that very much promotes being a senior executive of a hospital. That was what the program was focused on. So the CEO, COO, CFO, as long as it had a C, they were like, that's what we want you all to be. There are many other roles you can take on in healthcare, but that was the focus of this program. And so as I was in the program and learning more about senior executive roles, I made a determination that I didn't want to go into, we call it here the C-suite. I didn't want to go into those senior most roles because I wanted more work-life balance. And so I made this decision, and then I brought it to two women, two mentors. And one was a graduate school professor, health management professor, and the other was a CEO mentor that I was actually assigned to. I won an award, and she was a senior awardee, and they connected us as mentors. So that was an assigned relationship, and then it was my professor who also coached me in a competition, so we spent some time together as well. And so when I brought it to my professor, and I told her my decision, she looked at me incredulously, kind of in disbelief. And she told me that I was foolish for not, that I was limiting myself, and that I was foolish for not pursuing the senior highest roles when I had the talent and I was receiving the training to do that. And I also presented this decision to the CEO mentor. We were on the phone. And when I told her, she listened. She was quiet for a bit. She paused. She acknowledged my concern. She commended me on having the foresight to see that at such a young age, to see that there was this tension between being able to have the family and the, senior most role. And she said to me, "You can have both, just not at the same time." And her words rang as genuine and honest, and those words have stuck with me. It's been probably about 16 years since I had these conversations, but I have repeated those words dozens of times to many people who I have mentored, to the young women who have been mentees with me. And I'd like to think that in 16 years, we're transitioning to where you can have both at the same time. Maybe we're not there yet, but we're working to get there. But what was important was that she saw me, she saw where I was, she listened to my concern, and she recognized that before she gave the advice. And so I think that that CEO mentor, that's an example of compassionate mentorship, is being able to kind of meet the person, see them, and give the advice based on where that person is and where you are also as a mentor. So I just wanted to share that example with you all. Next slide. So I think a lot of times we like to know how to, so how do I do this? So I put this in here, how to be an effective mentor. And I chose 3 things: bring stories, be curious, and be you. And if I want to see how many of you, if you can raise your hand, if you're a mentor that's in the room. I'm going to go to the participants list and just look at who are the mentors we have in the room. I saw some of you during the intros. Okay, Valentine is a mentor. Dr. David, yes. Francine, Esther, first, thank you. I recognize, how busy your time is as mentors. And then I'll take a moment to pause and say, for the mentees in the room, lean in. Mentors are usually tapped to be a mentor because they've been very successful, and many people are tapping them. So as a mentee, really lean in and help guide the relationship by helping to schedule things and have an agenda prepared, rescheduling, emailing multiple times if necessary, recognizing that, that everyone is here from the goodness of their heart, and that sometimes it does get busy. I know that I appreciate that as a mentor. Sometimes I need some pushes from the mentees. It's not that I don't want to be there, but my schedule sometimes is conflicting. So just a word to the mentees, but thank you all, mentors. So yes, bring your stories. You have all this experience, bring them, not just the success ones, also the failures, right? The things that don't go well. Be curious. Sometimes as a mentor, we think that the mentee asks questions of us only, right? So as a mentor, I lean into also asking questions of my mentee and being really curious about what's happening in their world and how I can learn from their world as well, and how I can be reminded of that space that I was once in. And then be you. That goes back to just being vulnerable and showing up as your whole self. And then as a mentee, how to be an effective mentee, you can see it's the same thing. So I deliberately had this. These are 3 things that are accessible to any one of us. We all have stories. We all have the ability to be curious, and we all, can be ourselves. And so this is a reciprocal relationship. You're learning from each other, and really the task before you is the same for each of you. And that is what I believe will help this be a relationship that flourishes and enhances the leadership of both partners. Next slide. So, enhancing connection in the virtual setting. this is something that actually I've been working on, bringing leaders together. Like the work I actually do is to bring leaders together in the virtual setting. So I have had a lot of practice of seeing how do people connect better virtually. And so I brought some of those nuggets here today, just a few examples here today. So music, which you all did today, music is a great way to connect. So starting out sessions with music, it lightens the energy as you transition into your space. And then you might learn that you have some things in common through your shared music interests. So there's connection there. Coffee or snacks. So allowing the space to be one, if you're comfortable, and this is in different cultures, it's accepted differently, but one thing I'd like to say about culture is that I have taught many different cultures and often in the same classroom. So having, 6+ nationalities in the same classroom. And I always open by saying, we get to co-create the culture in this space. So we may have different cultures outside of this space, but in this space, we co-create it. So if it's you as a mentee and you as a mentor, and it's the two of you together, you may have different cultures externally. The room that you're sitting in may have a different culture, but in the Zoom room that you're present in, or if you meet in person, you get to create that culture. And so being explicit up front about the type of culture you want to have, it may be like, hey, we don't eat in front of each other in my culture, but is it okay, right? I'm doing this meeting during my lunch hour. Is it okay if I eat? And you can do that together. So, but that is one way to connect. Humans have been connecting over meals for thousands of years. And so it does help with connection if you're comfortable doing that in the virtual space. Having breaks is important. I recommend in my mentoring calls, we lead in, we'll meet at say 3 p.m. and then we say hello and then say, hey, have you eaten? Did you get a drink? And we take 10 minutes, go off camera, we go get food, get a drink, the music is playing and we come back, right? So that's building a break actually into your session, because otherwise sometimes you're not getting a break. You're going from one meeting to the next. And so building that into the session. So you start at 3 p.m., but from 3 to 3:10, you are going to break, use the bathroom, get your coffee, listen to music, do some deep breathing, and then you'll come to each other and you'll transition into the space together in a different way, in a more mindful way, hopefully. And then also video presence. Like I encourage you all to be on video if you can. It does help with connection. So I do encourage that when you're meeting, to have that presence, to be able to look in each other's eyes, to be able to read body language. I think, most of our communication is happening through body language. So to have that, but then also having grace with each other. Sometimes you're tired and you can't be on camera. And so having that grace, and once you build a vulnerable space, being comfortable to say, I'm going to be off camera today, and knowing that that's okay. So those are some tips for enhancing connection in the virtual setting, which I anticipate most of you will be using. Next slide. So to wrap up, the opportunity before you, you have this great opportunity through this program provided by the Center for Gender Equity to practice compassionate listening and compassionate leadership in your mentoring interactions. Practice meaning that you don't have to be perfect at it, right? Like you have this comfortable community that you can practice and know that if you get it wrong, you have someone who's going to give you grace. You can use this community to explore what compassionate leadership looks like in action. There are so many leaders in the room that we heard introduce themselves earlier. These are people who are practicing different aspects of compassionate leadership. So you can connect and really see what it looks like in action from those who are in this community. You get to build your compassion muscle, beginning with yourself. So starting with self-compassion, that's how we are able to extend compassion to others. And so by being in a community that's focused on compassionate leadership, you're building that muscle. It's something that the more you do it, the better you get at it. And you get to condition yourself to be more mindful in these workspaces and being more mindful as a leader. So if you already have a mindfulness practice, as some of you do, merging that with your work. And if you don't, building a mindfulness practice that is merged with your work. So that's an opportunity before you. And here I just have some resources that have shaped me. The first one is a book. I actually have it here because I was looking in it as I was preparing. The Heart Aroused. And this is a book that has guided me. And then Work by Thich Nhat Hanh, who you saw in the video. So there's a lot about being mindful in your work in that text. And then there's a self-compassion test. So I thought I would share that because I do believe that the first step of being a compassionate leader is practicing self-compassion, being compassionate with ourselves. The voice that we hear in our head should be the softest, nicest, kindest voice that we use all day. And so this is a test to let you know where you are right now, honestly, and you can take it over time as you build that compassion muscle. You can take this test again to see how you're progressing on your journey as a compassionate leader. So with that, thank you all. I think that's the last slide. Yes. Thank you all for showing up today. Keep showing up. That there's growth in that. That's a huge part of the work, is just showing up. And so thank you all for showing up today. I appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to hearing more from all of you in the discussion that we'll have next.
Yeah, thank you so much, April, for this interesting and engaging presentation. I'm sure the audience also found it interesting and could relate to what was being said. I, for one, was able to relate to what was being said about mindfulness, and can see where I need to work on. And I really appreciate the tips on effective mentorship, tips on how to improve communication in a virtual setting, and the relevant materials as well. So now is a chance for the mentors and mentees to raise your hands and ask any questions. In the meantime, let me read a question that came through the chat feature. There is a question from one of the mentees. How should we deal with people that think you're not strong enough with your leadership approach and undermines your direction?
Yeah. Very good question. And you all see me, so you see that I look very young. I'm not as young as I look, but I've always looked very young. And I started as a leader, meaning with my own staff, like personnel reporting to me at 24 years old. So I was very young, leading people who had children my age, even leading people who had been at my organization longer than I had been alive. And so when you ask the question about people undermining your leadership, I experienced that a lot early on, and I still do because I look young. And so how do you handle that? I believe that it really is in the showing up, like being there, being present. You don't have to prove yourself. I think what you don't want to do is feel like you have to prove yourself, but you do just be consistent in your approach and consistent in your leadership. And when people see you showing up consistently and recognize what you bring to the table as a leader, they will over time begin to recognize it. I have had one active approach is to have an open conversation about it. So when you get to a place that's comfortable to say, I recognize that either I'm new in this space, or I recognize that I look younger than I am, or I recognize you have some experience in this technical area beyond me, and to have a conversation about how you learn together. So I recognize these things. This is what I bring. So I bring this technical expertise to the space. So for me as a 24-year-old, leading my own department and having staff, I didn't have, some of those people worked in that area, it was neurology. They worked in neurology in operations for, 10, 15 years before I got there. But I had specific management training that was complementary to their experience. So it was saying, I don't have 10 or 15 years knowing the operations of this epilepsy center, right? But I do have this management training, and we can combine that and work together and enhance both of our work. And so having that explicit conversation and coming to them and being consistent with that over time is what I found worked best to address that But I would say a lot of it is mental. So just knowing you don't have to actively try to prove yourself, just be consistent in your work and recognize your value, and have those conversations when it's appropriate.
Thank you. And I see one of our mentors or mentees, Sonati, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Tsion. I do echo your words, what you mentioned about April's insights and all. So April, I have a question. With the pandemic, the amount of emotional bandwidth you can offer has become limited. There are a lot of people affected differently and at different scenarios with the COVID pandemic. And in regarding this, have you ever experienced the scenario wherein you had to prioritize yourself over others? Because we need to be empathetic for self at the same time. This has been a challenge both personally as and professionally to me.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. The idea of prioritizing ourselves. And I'll lead by saying this is a common example that you hear used is on the airplane, right? Where they say, put on your mask first before you help others put on their mask. So yes, I think we should be prioritizing ourselves and our self-care and our well-being in order to be able to be compassionate leaders and help others. But what I hear in your question also is around consent. One habit that I'm getting into in my personal and professional relationships, because I do show up as a compassionate leader, I'm getting into the habit of asking for consent for conversations. So if it is something that is heavy and weighted, right? If I'm meeting with my mentor and I have a huge struggle that I'm going through at work that is very emotionally heavy, I will ask my mentor for consent because they might be going through something emotionally heavy in their own life and may not be able to take on what I have right now. And so saying, I'm going through a really tough situation at work right now. It's very stressful. I'd like to get your advice. Do you have the emotional capacity to listen to that right now with whatever is going on in your world? And so it's being explicit in these ways that don't feel comfortable because we haven't done that before. But I think that's the way that we ensure that we have the capacity to continue showing up for each other. And so it's kind of drawing those boundaries. So asking for consent is a good way to know when I can prioritize myself or when I'm prioritizing the other.
Thank you.
And this takes practice. It's not going to feel comfortable. It's going to feel weird at first, but it's practicing it with each other. And that's why I love that you have this deliberate, intentional space through this mentoring program to practice.
Great, great. And well, I was looking into the chat box and the Q&A feature. There doesn't seem to be a lot of questions, but there was one that was sent through the chat box. I think you said something about it when responding to the earlier question. The question is, how can a mentor and mentee communicate in a compassionate way when they are not in a place to listen deeply? I believe this means when they have challenges in communication or they are not in a position to communicate well.
Good question. What's coming to mind right now is sitting together. And I know that we all feel like we just don't have time. I believe it's very important to make these spaces as comfortable as possible so that it doesn't feel like an obligation or a burden. And that's why I say have your music, have your coffee. If you make the space comfortable, book it at a time of day. I tend to have my meetings at a time of day, either on the weekends, if I'm meeting in person where I have like flexibility and freedom, or if it's during the week, like towards the end of my day where my brain is already tired, I know I'm not going to be that productive with my regular work anyway. And so I'll do it a little later because I have these comfortable spaces. We have music, we have our coffee, it's more relaxed. I can then really kind of lean in. And so maybe we don't get as much, I want to say productive. Maybe it doesn't feel as productive as it might feel, but being together is creating that connection. I'm thinking about a meeting I had with a mentor last week, and really we spent the majority of our hour just being together because we were both so tired. And we've developed a relationship over years, but we caught up because we hadn't talked in a while. We caught up a bit, and then we both kind of sat, and then we eventually got to some of the more productive stuff at the end, but I knew that that was okay. We didn't need to, within the first 5 minutes, get to, the questions that I had for her or that she had for me. We just allowed ourselves to sit in that space and connect over some of the things that were happening in our life personally, right? So if you hear in the background, if you hear a baby, asking how the baby is doing, if you're comfortable with that. Or if you see a pet, asking about the pet. If you see the picture I see on Tsion's wall, where did you get that picture? These are casual things that you're connecting with your mentor, mentee around, and you don't have to do the deep listening if you're not in a space to take that on at the time. And if you're comfortable saying, I've had a really long day. I don't know how present I can be today. Can we have some light conversation? Can you tell me about where you grew up? Can you tell me about why you moved to the city you're in? This is still really meaningful and productive. The more you get to know each other, the more comfortable you're going to be giving each other advice and developing each other's leadership. So it's okay to have that time that doesn't feel productive.
Great. And there is one more question. In your experience, both as a mentor and a mentee, what are some of your biggest hurdles in listening and speaking with compassion?
Well, the one that comes, I'm just going to say one for time. And the one that popped in my mind was hierarchy, the feeling of hierarchy. I have a mentor who is like a legend in the Philadelphia healthcare space. He was the chief operating officer of the University of Pennsylvania. Someone's connected to the University of Pennsylvania in this room. I heard that earlier. He was the chief operating officer of the University of Pennsylvania's health system, which is huge in the Philadelphia market where my career started. And, he's this huge icon. And so early on, there was this feeling of, am I burdening him? Does he really have time for me? I have to ask the best questions so that his time is, valued and he doesn't get bored. And so that was a huge hurdle for, compassion, because I brought that hurdle myself. I was thinking that this person was too big for my little questions or for me to waste their time. And as we started to just have casual lunches, as we realized our love of books, so a lot of our mentoring meetings now, we spend the first few minutes talking about the books that we're reading. As we did that, we both were able to be more compassionate and have that compassionate listening taking place. And now, it's been years now, of course, but we have a nice flow that happens. But I walk away from every meeting with career advice that is more deep and more relevant than if I had just done interview style question of, what should I do with this, next move or next opportunity? A lot came out of just that time of talking about books.
Thank you so much, April. We are extremely grateful for your participation, for leading this, and also for the mentors and mentees who made time to attend this webinar. There are a couple of questions here, but I would like to say that we encourage you to keep the questions coming, and we'll respond to those through email and further communications. Maybe going forward, what I can explain about the next steps for this cohort. Next, we plan to send the profile book to all mentors and mentees at the end of this week, and then prepare separate webinars for mentors and mentees in a few months' time. We will, of course, keep the events set apart so that there will be ample time for the mentees and mentors to connect and build relationships. And in the meantime, we'll also share relevant materials, online articles, and activities that you can do together. Of course, we will keep the email communications going on. We will facilitate a midterm check-in between January and February 2023. So if in the meantime you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to reach out to us always through the center's email address. As you can see here on the last slide, we have Deborah, who's the coordinator at the Center for Gender Equity. You can reach out directly to her or through the center's email. And I'm sure you are all acquainted with her by now. But I'd like to close by saying that I really appreciate April's engagement with this. We really hope to see more of you in the future. But thank you for making this engaging, and also to the audience for staying till the end of the session and following up on the conversation. So have a great day, evening. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.